The Vietnam War, a tale of violence, heartache, and tears. Countless soldiers, civilians, and innocent bystanders killed in action. Young men stolen away from their mothers to become another cog in the war machine. This conflict raged on for nearly 20 years, beginning in 1955 and ending in 1975. In this documentary, we'll be taking a closer look at what happened during this time period on the home front and in Vietnam. Hello, gentlemen. Nice to meet you. Emilio Fernandez with the CBS.
How you doing? Pleasure, man.
Let's get this interview on. Tell me, why did you decide to become involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement?
Man, throughout my life, I've seen enough death and pain to know that war is senseless, man. It really is. The rich and powerful, they start conflicts with other nations and then treat their civilians like pawns in a game of chess. It's not cool. War should be avoided at all costs. Plain and simple.
Do you not feel that this war is necessary? I mean, the Vietnamese are slaughtering each other over there.
Listen, man, there's better ways. I mean, look at what we're doing as Americans. Sending armed forces overseas just to contribute to the bloodshed? I mean, that's a total shame, man.
What do you plan to accomplish with this movement? What are you doing right now? And do you think it'll be enough to create change?
Together, man, we're going to be able to shut down this whole operation. We've got to put an end to this war, or we're going to be in some real deep shit. At the moment, we're marching in the streets, demonstrating wherever we see fit. It'll take time, but soon enough, the American government's going to be on its knees.
Hell yeah, man. Thank you for joining me today. In January of 1967, Ramparts magazine published photographs of Vietnamese children burned by napalm in an offensive attack by the U.S. military. This sparked the attention of leaders of other movements and caused outrage among the general populace of America. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the major figures from another movement that took this as a call to action and spoke about it at one of his speeches. It was at this point that full-fledged protest and demonstration began. On October 21st, 1967, around 100,000 protesters gathered around Lincoln Memorial. 30,000 or so continued in a march on the Pentagon later that night. After a hostile confrontation with the soldiers that were protecting the building, hundreds of demonstrators were arrested. These actions, in the eyes of people around the U.S., this got more movements to join them, such as the Women's Liberation Movement.
By 1968, some protests evolved into full-fledged riots. Demonstrators wanted the attention necessary to make a difference. Buildings were vandalized and people were injured. While these actions were performed without casualties, many disapproved of this method of protest. The most common form of resistance during this time was peacefully marching in the streets, occupying public spaces, and petitioning. Many Americans took time off work and students skipped school to take part in anti-war activities. As well as this, many influential songs were released that spread the message of the anti-war movement, such as John Lennon's Imagine or Buffalo Springfield's For What It's Worth.
In 1968, the launch of the TET offensive by North Vietnamese Communist troops and its success against U.S. and South Vietnamese troops sent waves of shock and discontent across the home front. It sparked the most intense period of anti-war protests to date.
On May 4th of 1970, 4 Kent State University students were killed and 9 were injured when members of the Ohio National Guard opened fire on a crowd gathered to protest the Vietnam War. In its immediate aftermath, a student-led strike forced the temporary closure of colleges and universities across the nation. This tragic event led to many Americans reevaluating their support for and association with the war.
As war dragged on, more and more Americans grew weary of mounting casualties and escalating costs. The small anti-war movement grew into an unstoppable force, pressuring American leaders to reconsider their commitment to the cause.
Peace movement leaders opposed the war on moral and economic grounds. The anti-Vietnam War protests and demonstrations ultimately aimed to withdraw American soldiers from Vietnam, and that's exactly what happened.
January 27th, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords is signed, effectively ending the war in Vietnam. A great deal of credit for this achievement is owed to the demonstrators and protesters who took action to make change. The remaining American forces stationed in Vietnam are withdrawn and brought back home. However, these war veterans were not welcomed back with open arms. The sad truth is that unlike the hero status given to the returning soldiers from World War II, the soldiers that served in Vietnam were portrayed as psychos, drug addicts, and warmongers.